Welcome everybody to the Ginposium tasting that we've been doing for, I think, 7 years I've been doing this for now. So many of you have probably sat through quite a lot and gone, well, this is very nice and this is very odd, perhaps. But as ever, it's 8 gins that come out in the last year that I think are either a really good example of something or are unusual or are rare. And we've got actually quite a lot of those today. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thankfully, I'm not just here chatting on my own, which would be terrible and very boring for everybody that was watching. I've got a panel of guest tasters who are just very quickly going to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Christy.
Of course. So hi there, my name's Christiana Sherry. I'm the editor at Master of Malt. I write about spirits, travel to distilleries. I've judged on a few panels, the World Gin Awards and the ADI Judging on Craft Spirits, 2 most recent ones. And yeah, love all things gin and all things spirited.
Bernadette.
Oh, hi, I'm Bernadette Pamplin. I started writing under the influence about 5 years ago. Now I'm really into my gin. I judge gin. I was a brand ambassador for a while, and I now write for publications, including Gin Magazine.
Anne.
Hi, so I'm Anne Brock. I'm the Master Distiller at Bombay Sapphire, which means that I lead the team of 18 distillers that makes Bombay Sapphire at Laverstoke Mill in Hampshire, and I'm also Grand Rectifier of the Gin Guild.
In company. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joanne Moore. I'm the Master Distiller for Quintessential Brands based at G&J Distillers up in Warrington in Cheshire. So I look after the premium brand portfolio, and I also judge on ISC for many years as well. And love gin.
Good place to be. And Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Pearson. I work in new product development at the Cotswolds Distillery. I'm relatively new to the industry, but I'm really getting into gin at the moment.
Marvellous. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you everybody for watching. I'll say that now before you turn off. Let's just take the first one, because I know people have poured already. So, and then I'll tell you a little bit about this first one. So, when you've had a little taste, interested to hear just some very initial ideas before I tell you a little bit more about it.
I mean, when I put my nose into the glass, what it reminds me of is if you've ever picked up a juniper berry and bitten into it, that waxy green aroma that hits initially is what hit me first when I put it on the nose.
Yeah, for me, it's got a real lushness to it, a real greenness to it. It's really fresh, but it's got a bit of a kind of spicy base note coming through as well. What I really like about the spice is that it doesn't detract from how mouth-filling and mouth-watering it is. I think it's really lovely.
Joanne?
I concur with the other 2 ladies that it's a nice fresh camphor pine note, a characteristic of the juniper.
So I guess one of the things that my question would be, is it something that you would describe as being complex or not?
No, not necessarily.
Well, that's quite difficult because it's lacking a complexity in there being all these different things happening, but what it's doing still has a complexity, if that makes sense. It's made up by something simple, yeah. I think, yeah.
I mean, for me, it's if you've ever tasted a juniper distillate and a crushed juniper distillate, this is a crushed juniper distillate where it's got like Joanne was saying, that real camphor, fresh juniper, waxy note coming through. But it's got the complexity almost of the whole juniper berry but it's slightly one-dimensional in that sense.
Yeah. Well,
not in a bad way. It's a great, it tastes great.
I like the fact that, yes, it's simplistic because I'm just going to steal your fun a little bit, that there's not many botanicals in there. But on the other side, it does actually show the complexity of what juniper does as a single ingredient on its own as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the product we've got here is from Plymouth. It's Mr. King's 1842. It's 41.2% ABV. Just before the start of the call, I had a chat to Sean, who's the distiller there, and he was telling me a little bit about the story behind it. So essentially, in some of their old records, there were 2 people called King who were involved in the distillery around about that sort of time, 1840s, 1850s. And they were a father and son, and they don't know whose recipe it was because it just says Mr. King. And it is just 2 botanicals, just juniper and just orris. That's all that's in there. but the juniper is picked on a single day in a single location in Italy. So it's very much a focus on the expression that you can just get from juniper. It's a limited run. They're not going to make it again, and this kind of feeds into really kind of the idea of this whole tasting, which seems to be a trend that's emerging somewhat in 2020, but was already starting in 2019. Is that we're starting to see with a lot of new distilleries that are coming out, they make lots and lots and lots and lots of different gins. I mean, someone like sort of Southwestern Distillery probably in their time done maybe 30 or 40 different gins since they've been opened. The new Fenner one is fantastic, by the way. And so it's in, but we haven't necessarily seen that so much from some of the more established distilleries. But now we are seeing that, and I'll talk a bit about some of the other distilleries as well. But for me, I think this is the first gin, as opposed to a fruit cup or something like that, that Plymouth have launched since the Navy gin came out, and that was at least 10 years ago. So it's quite. So when I found out they were doing this gin, I was quite excited when I found out that it was so focused on juniper, which is obviously the key part of gin. I thought that was great. Just before we move on, any particular thoughts on how you would drink this recreationally?
I think when you dilute it, you lose some of the interesting notes in the juniper, and you get more of the orris roots, some more of the floral notes. So I would probably be inclined to drink it more as a martini style gin rather than a long drink, a short drink.
I would agree. To me, I thought something like that sort of diamond style martini, like they do at Duke's, I think would be perfect. You get the texture and just that bright resinous. So yeah, an exciting one to start with. So we'll now move on to the second one. I guess another trend with both these two gins. This is a Brut Ultra Dry Gin, which is from Atom Labs. You're also starting to see some people focusing more on the juniper variant. I talked a little bit about this last year, but there was also a big increase in fruit gins and that last year as well. But now also some people are saying, junipers, they just taste fantastic. Let's get more of that in our gin. And that's kind of what's going on with this one. So there's a range of classic gin botanicals, and then there's an additional cold distilled juniper to add more complexity for the juniper, and then some citrus as well. So and this is a little bit stronger. It's 48%. So so we'll do let's have a little taste of the Brut here. Now it does say on the bottle, if you add water, it will likely yelloish. It does put that as a mark of pride on the bottle, and I know there is it might be contentious with some of the panel members. But what are the thoughts? Bernie, do you want to start off with us?
Yeah, I really like this. So I did notice a start of a trend with the sort of juniper forward gins in recent years. Never Never were doing a lot, like the Juniper Freak and things like that, and they were doing very well with that. And it's quite nice after a period of heavily flavoured gins and people kind of turning away from the sort of the more traditional notes, that we're kind of coming back to it. So I really like it, and obviously the plus side looks like it's going to be really good in the cocktail. So yeah, big fan.
Great. Anyone else thoughts on this?
I think Alex? This one, yeah, I think it's kind of interesting in comparison to the first one, because to me it shows the kind of richer side of the juniper berry rather than the kind of really light kind of notes that you get in the first one a lot more. I think this one kind of shows a broader range of flavors that you can get from that one botanical.
Yeah, and I guess probably some of that's coming through using these sort of different techniques of how the distillation is and that. What about in terms of like how you might want to drink it? Christy, any thoughts?
I think I just want to have it in something that's really going to showcase the juniper. So again, similar to the first gin, for me, like a martini or even maybe a Negroni for a bit of a punch would be awesome. I really like a gin that shows that you don't have to be all bells and whistles and like crazy botanicals to be good. Sometimes you can pare it back and just show that you're kind of classy with a much smaller bunch of botanicals, which I really enjoy.
Yeah. Joanne, Anne, anything to add?
I guess if I was going to drink this, I think For me, I think I agree with Joanne on the last one. It was definitely a martini gin, whereas this one for me, I think I'd need it lengthened a bit. There's a lot going on in terms of the volume of oil on the palate. So to put it with even just a soda would be really interesting.
It's a very nice gin and soda. I can attest when I taste it. I bought a bottle, but it didn't last very long because I just experimented with different things. But drink responsibly. Joanne.
Okay, so I'm just going to say something about the lushing. I like the idea of the gin. I love the concept. There's a book coming, sorry. I think it is very heavy in juniper, and I have no problems with that because I do like juniper. I would wish it wasn't lushing though, so that lets it down for me because I consider lushing a fault. And I know the jury's out on this, but for me, if I was judging that as a gin on a panel, I would downgrade it for lushing because I think you could achieve it just as well, that flavour profile, without the lushing. So I would mark it down purely on the fact that it lushes. But it's a lovely concept. I just wish they'd kind of achieved it without the lushing.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. I know there's definitely, it is, like you said, the jury's out. It's very split, I think, on what people think. So, but a lot of the master distillers I know don't like lushing. So what does that tell you? People that make it a lot don't like it. All right, we'll move on now to a gin which I hope doesn't loosh. I don't think it would loosh, knowing who's made it. So this is the Hayman's Rare Cut Gin. This is, again, it's quite limited. It's 50%. It's 50% because it was made to celebrate Christopher Hayman's 50th year working in the gin industry. And it's classic botanicals, a little bit moved towards the spice with things like cinnamon and cassia and nutmeg in there. Nice neutral base. So let's have a taste of this. So one of the things I quite like immediately on the taste of it is there's a freshness to the citrus, and it's not like really heavy on the citrus, but there is a nice vibrance there. I think there's a nice there's a slight creaminess, there's a nice smoothness to the spice. Happens to be a style of gin I quite enjoy anyway, something that's a little bit more spicy, but I think that higher ABV also just helps to give a little bit more intensity. So I think the mixing potential for this is quite strong. Joanne, any thoughts?
I think it is a delightful, classical, well-blended gin. And given the fact that it's 50%, that integration of alcohol is really well done. So I'd expect nothing less from the Hayman's Group. So yeah, really well done.
Alice?
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly soft for a gin at 50%. Although cassia is, my personal taste is I don't really like it so much. I think here it works really well to give that kind of natural sweetness, which I always kind of support spice really well.
Lovely. And Anne, any thoughts?
I mean, I just love the nose on this to begin with. It was super fresh, almost mentholish in terms of its freshness. It sort of left you feeling clean after nosing it and just wanting more. And then, you know, I know you'd said it was 50% when you introduced it, but when I tasted it, that had completely gone from my mind, and I just thought it was a beautiful, smooth sipping gin. But actually, the fact that that's 50% is remarkable. It's an outstanding gin, in my opinion.
I think you're spot on. It is, whilst it's that strong, I mean, it is very sippable, either just neat as it is, or with like a bit of ice or something like that. It would just be so easy just to drink neat. So, any other thoughts on drinks from Christy? Any thoughts on drinks for this?
I really love the precision of this. I feel like, yeah, when you sort of nose it and taste it, everything has its place and it's so just well done. Like nothing is shouting over each other. It's really gorgeous. I would love it. I feel like a good tonic wouldn't dilute this, but I'd want like a good hefty amount of the gin in there. Yeah, I would be inclined, if I was drinking it for fun, almost not to mix it and just enjoy it as it is.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Bernie?
I just wanted to comment on the mouthfeel. I really like the mouthfeel. It's almost like when you're sucking on a sweet and you're kind of putting your mouth around it as you drink it, and I really like that. I think that's really good. With regards to drinking it, I don't really want anything to change the flavour too much. So I would even be inclined to maybe just top it up just with a dash of mineral water or something, just very light, just to give it a little bit of fizz and see what that does, I think.
Oh, lovely. Oh, great. Well, just before we move on, let's just have a quick cheers to Chris. And great all what you've done. Cheers, Chris.
Chris, well done.
Okay. So we now move on to gin number 4. This is from Hendrix. Again, Hendrix have been doing an increasing number of variations. We had the Midsummer Solstice last year, and then we've got this. I've actually got a bottle here. There'll be a picture that goes up, but anyway, we've got a bottle here. This is the Luna. This is what we're moving on to now. There's also the Amazonia, which has just come out in duty free, unfortunately, so we won't be tasting that for a little bit, but it is very nice if you get a chance. This kind of it takes the basics of the Hendrix botanicals with some floral and spice notes, and is somewhat rather inspired about how you might want to drink gin after a meal as opposed to drinking it beforehand. So often you might have a gin tonic or a martini before dinner. This is kind of the nightcap of gins, you might describe it as. So, okay, so the Hendrix Luna. One of the things I must say, I went when they launched this, and I've tasted it a couple of times, but it's interesting how with gin, and this is with gin in general, each time you come back to it, you can get different aromas and things. And so just tasting a gin once, I don't always think like you can't ever really truly appreciate it. Never mind about mixing it and stuff, but actually coming back to it, you're getting more things from it. But I'll talk about that in a sec when you've had a say. Christy, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So for me, this is just like it sounds so cheesy to say, but like a wonderful like bouquet of florals. It's wonderful. Like I'm getting a bit of rose, maybe a bit of lavender, a bit of violet. It's actually the first time I've tasted this one, so it's kind of literally off the bat. But yeah, but I like that there's like a peppery spice to kind of ground it all together. It's not like sweetly floral. It's fresh. It's quite aromatic, and yeah, I like the spice element too.
Anne?
So for me, the nose is, you know, it's almost sweet and creamy, but I guess that's the floral notes all coming together and coming through. And it's really quite interesting because, you know, we've just come off 3 gins where juniper was really quite the focus, and this feels like it's slightly less the focus. I like it, but again, when it comes to the mouthfeel, if you compare it against the 50% Haymans, the Haymans is smoother. This one's got a real kick to it, I think. And I think that might be, as Christy was saying, the peppery note coming through towards the end.
Yeah, this is, I should have said 43.4% ABV. But yeah, there's that peppery, slightly menthol thing for sure, I think, going on. Joanne?
Yeah, you do get a little bit of a hit at the end on the mouthfeel, but for me, I feel it's more rather than the alcohol doing that work. I think it's probably the black pepper. And I quite like the floral notes, obviously. And I really like the fact that you've got floral and a little bit of spice in there as well, but it's more like black pepper, cracked black pepper spice.
Yeah, and that's one of the suggestions, and I've certainly tried it with like gin tonics or with ginger ale or something. That's kind of one of the garnish is the black pepper thing, which I think actually works quite well because you get that initial aroma coming up when you're smelling it, and so that's quite good. Alice, anything to add?
Pretty much already been said.
Fair enough.
Slightly thinner on the mouthfeel for me, which I'm not such a fan of, but I like the black pepper.
Bernie, anything to add?
I'd probably really just say I just like the way those components work together, because the floral notes are quite delicate, and it's the way in which the spice kind of rushes in at the end. They're both moving in different ways, and it works quite well together, and I quite like that.
Excellent. Okay. So moving on to number 5. So this is the 5th gin in the lineup. This is new from Tanqueray. This is Tanqueray number 10, and it is the Citrus Heart edition. And so this has, in addition to the normal Tanqueray botanicals, Tanqueray 10 botanicals, I should say, it has pink grapefruit in addition to the white grapefruit that was already there. And it also has rosemary as well. And so it was somewhat inspired by Terry's, the distiller there. He's kind of wanting to kind of focus on that citrus aspect of Tanqueray, which of course traditional Tanqueray and Gordon's as well doesn't have any citrus actually in the gin, but Tanqueray 10 does, and how you can kind of play with that. And so that's why we've got the additional pink grapefruit and also the rosemary there. This is at 45.3% ABV. And this one, they've sort of slightly redesigned the packaging. It's a slightly clearer looking bottle here, rather than the green, and then this sort of copper, and a lovely copper top on the top there. So, and this is another duty-free product that they released at the beginning of the year. Steve, do you want to start us off, please?
Yeah, I just want to say that rosemary is one of my favourite things in a gin. Like, I love it so much, either as a garnish or like as a botanical. It's so aromatic, so gorgeous, it's so light, and grapefruit as well. I think they're really well integrated. For me, I just want to lengthen it out into a Collins and just kick back in the sun and have a nice time.
Sounds lovely. Alice?
Yeah, same for me. I really like, to me, the grapefruit is definitely more on the forefront. And it's really kind of amped up on the nose, but the rosemary is really good at supporting that. And what's quite interesting to me is it's so kind of zesty and grapefruity that you get that that kind of feeling on your tongue that you also get if you just bit into like grapefruit peel, like that kind of tingly, like almost like a burning sensation, but like not in a bad way, which I think is quite cool.
That's great. It almost reminds me slightly of like, I don't know that you get grapefruit marmalade, but like, you know, you get like a sort of citrus medley marmalade. So maybe 5 citruses or 3 citruses, and some of it's grapefruit. There's that little bit of sweetness in there as well. And that's kind of what it reminds me of. Joanne?
I like the fact that it's great. I like the combination of grapefruit and rose. It's probably a little bit too overtly citrus for my taste. You get a lot of the grapefruit. You don't tend to get the rosemary until you actually taste it and dilute it. You're getting more of the grapefruit on the aroma. But yeah, it's a nice combination, probably just a little bit too overt in citrus. And I know that's what they're intending to do. So, but maybe you could balance a little bit more with the rosemary for me.
Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with Joanne in terms of the overtness of the citrus. I think you do, you know, if we're talking about gin here, we are losing the juniper somewhat, but again, that's what they were, you know, they were emphasizing the grapefruit, and they've done that in a, you know, in a very good way. It's very strong. I am getting the rosemary on the nose, but it's almost, I'm not sure I would have got it had I not known it was there. It's almost like I know it's there and therefore I find it, but it's very subtle. But on the mouth, it's delicious aftertaste, which I really enjoy because I think rosemary is a great herb. And also, I know rosemary can be awful when you distill it, and they've got the true aromaticity, almost the sweetness of rosemary, that sweet savoury balance that rosemary has, and they've got that really well. It's done really well.
I think one of the interesting things, having played around in a few different drinks with it, is that depending on how you've mixed it, sometimes the rosemary's further up and sometimes the grapefruit's further up, and it's so you can really play with it, which I think is, which you don't necessarily get tasting it neat, but it is one of the interesting things about the product. And of course, the first variation of Tanqueray 10 since it's ever come out, which is, I mean, this is leading back to the same point I keep making, which is, you know, because there's so many different gins and so much innovation going on, now some of the, you know, more and more of the established brands and distilleries are having to make their own variations as well. Final word to you, Bernie, on this one. How would you drink it?
How would I drink this? I would probably just have this as a gin and tonic. I would probably keep it simple with something like a Mediterranean tonic, maybe to just maybe bring out a bit more of an accent of the herbaceous natures. Could I just say as well, it might just be me, but I'm curious because you've kind of got this integration of grapefruit and rosemary, which is becoming quite a classic combination in the gin world. I was probably expecting the grapefruit to be slightly more tart. So when you said about it being sort of marmalade-y, from when you said that, I always found it slightly caramelly at points. It is slightly sweet, I think. So maybe something to mix with it that would just cut that. Maybe something a little bit sour to cut it would work as well.
Yeah, works quite nicely with just in like a highball, just with maybe a bit of citrus and just sparkling water or something like that. That seems to work. And then you get more of those complex flavors kind of coming out. What do people think about the sort of sippability of it? Because that was one of the things that struck me. I found that it was relatively easy to sip, but I don't know if that's just me or other people think the same.
I think it's got a slight, like everyone's been saying, a slight sweetness, and whether that's from the sort of marmalade notes of the grapefruit or the slight sweet nature of rosemary, but sweetness always for me means sippability. But personally, I'd mix this.
Yeah, So now we move on to the 6th gin, which is Nadar gin. This is from Arbiki on the east coast of Scotland, and this is billed as the first climate positive gin. So for every 700 mils of gin, that's 1 or minus 1.54 kilograms of carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere, which is the equivalent of 30 white cups of tea. Just to put it in perspective.
Fact of the day.
There you go. The base spirit of this is peas. And so part of the reason why it's got such a positive impact is that peas don't need any nitrogen fertilizer, which generates a lot of CO2. And also the ground that they've been grown in, they kind of replenish it to some extent. And so the crops that go in it subsequently also don't need this nitrogen fertilizer. So that's kind of the... I mean, eat your peas, I think, and drink your peas in that respect. So this is a totally different base spirit. So definitely switching the gears with this one. As it's a bit different, let's go into a little bit more detail. Any thoughts on the nose on this one, Alice?
Yeah, to me, kind of super rich, kind of sweet, almost like chocolatey, but also kind of bizarre in a quite nice way.
It's totally unique. I don't think there's anything I've had that smells like this. It's just slightly tricky to get your head round because you're like, Christy, you look like you got something to say.
I'm just thinking about how, for me, my first thought was it was like a creamy vegetable vibe, and I think that was because what we just tasted before was so sweet in comparison. But actually, when you go back to it, there is a sweetness to it. It's just a much fresher sweetness. It's quite an organic sweetness, but it doesn't detract from the vegetable creamy side, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, they're definitely creamy on the nose for sure. And then having a little taste. Bernie, any thoughts on tasting it?
This is it's like you say, it's quite tricky to get your head around. And I was quite interested in this one because I'm interested in the whole sustainability thing. So when I saw what this one was on about, I did a bit of research and I was hoping to drop some of that information in and look quite clever. But you've already done it, David. So thank you very much. Yeah, it is very vegetative. I can imagine some people might find it tricky to get over that initially. But I think for that, you've kind of got a different spirit. It's doing something different. I think really when people get used to it, it could be quite the stepping stone. I did see it came from Kirsty's PhD scholarship. She kind of spent quite a long time working on it, and it's really interesting to see. I'm really pleased to try this product, actually. Yeah,
certainly not what you would describe as a classic gin, I don't think. But,
no, not at all, actually. But it does have notes. You can akin it to a gin. You can, I think, but it is definitely a bit different. So I think there'll be a bit of a transition period with people. I think.
And I think that's partly the case. Anytime someone's making their own base spirit, there's always a variation on what's going on there. Any thoughts on how to drink this, Anne?
So again, this for me is a mixing gin. I don't see it as being a martini gin, but I think that's maybe due to that sort of I was going to say strange base spirit character, and by strange I just mean unusual, because it's unique, which really comes to form for me isn't a martini taste. So I'd be intrigued as a Negroni. I think it could hold its own against some other strong flavors. You know, a lot of gins get lost with other strong flavors, whereas this one's got a real, for me, a striking citrus note on the palate, which would hold up quite well in Negroni, I think.
Any other thoughts, Joan?
I concur with Anne in terms of I wouldn't drink it neat. I feel that this pea base, whilst it's unusual, it is covering a little bit of those traditional botanicals, the juniper, the coriander and angelica type flavours. But when you dilute it, you do tend to get some of those traditional notes coming through, so it's more kind of recognisable as a gin. So I would definitely want to drink it more as a long drink rather than a short drink, but it's exceptionally smooth and really soft on the taste.
It's got quite a lot of lime leaf in there and the macrate lime as well, so I think that gives a little bit of the effervescence. I had it just because I was intrigued by one of the pictures from the website of one of the people had a glass full of peas. I thought it was kind of interesting. So I did try a gin and tonic with it, and instead of using ice, I used frozen peas, which is The drink I call the Lascelles, named after Alice Lascelles, because in one of her books, she talks about one time being served a gin and tonic that had a frozen pea stuck to the ice cube. And it actually worked quite well. The nicest thing is that obviously after a little bit, when you finish the drink, you get to eat the peas afterwards, which I quite enjoy. But there we go. So that's one thought, a bit gimmicky, but I think very much the long drinks are a good choice for that one. So we then move on to our penultimate gin. So this is from Warner's, and this is their apple and pear gin. So we've got, so the way that this is made is you've got, they distill the gin, and then in part of the proofing process, they use apple juice and pear juice. So essentially a third of what's in the bottle is juice. And this is a trend I've seen a bit in the US, but I've seen some other places as well, where rather than just proofing down with water, some other products might be used. Now, in some cases that might be wine, sometimes it's cider. I know someone that infuses water with cucumber and then uses that in their proofing. And that's also why, as Christy very well demonstrated, we've got a very slight colour to it, but it's got juice in it. It's exactly what you would expect. So I think what's quite nice about this is you've got some of those fruity elements to it, but it's done, I think, in quite a nice sort of genuine, sort of nice crisp kind of way still. Alice, do you want to kick us off with this one, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think after tasting the last 6, the thing that jumps out the most is just the sweetness.
Yeah.
I mean, it is incredibly sweet. In terms of the apple and the pear, I quite like the balance between the two flavors. I think you can distinguish both of them. But to me, this is on the kind of edge of where I would consider a gin being, a gin, just because of that intense sweetness, and I'm kind of not getting anything but apple and pear.
It's moving very much, certainly moving towards the fruit, the end of things. I mean, for me, actually, I do still get some of the underlying botanicals. It's one of the things I quite like about it, is I think there is a balance between the two. Can anyone else get the sort of botanical flavors going on?
Yeah.
Anne, do you want to?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm somebody who actually, and please don't share this one. I drink gin and apple juice, so it's I like it as a drink. Apple's quite a difficult flavour to handle, and certainly I don't think anyone's distilled it successfully yet or infused it. So this is quite an ingenious way of getting the apple note into a gin. I do still get the gin. I very clearly get the Warner's gin in there. But I agree with Alice. It's very sweet, but that's part of its flavour profile, and I think it's great as a flavoured gin.
I think also for fairness, the sweetness is because we've had so many dry
We've
gins.
also had dry gins.
Last year we had a lot more fruity gins. If we'd had it in there, we'd be like, well, this is actually quite dry in comparison. But today we're a little bit more on the dry gins.
I don't think the sweetness comes across to me as particularly like added sugar. It tastes like the natural sweetness of apple juice.
Yeah.
Joanne?
So I agree in terms of the sweetness. The sweetness doesn't come across as added sugar at all. It very much comes across as it's coming naturally from the juice. I quite like the way they've got the characteristic of the apple and the pear. It's just very hard to work with apple. You tend to get quite artificial type, kind of pear droppy chemical notes from apple. You don't do it well. So they've done a really good job of getting that balance in there. And I do get this nice thread of the traditional style of juniper and the gin characteristic just in the background, just kind of holding it up. And it is lovely and sweet, but someone who's got a sweet tooth, I quite like it, and I would quite happily just drink it neat, cold, and with a bit of ice, and that'd be sorted.
Bernie, any thoughts on how you drink this?
How I drink this? I'll start off with what I thought, if that's okay, and come back to that. I'm so sorry. So I found this really interesting because I totally concur with everybody with the apple and pear, but I do get other botanicals there as well. And weirdly, I get the sweetness that comes from it almost makes me think of lychees, and I really like lychees. They're one of the sweetest of fruits, I think, and they're not even in it, but it makes me think of it. But then you get things like pepper and cardamom and this spice coming through as well. And I think it's really well done. I really like it, to be honest with you. How would I drink this? To be honest, I quite like it on its own. Is that bad?
And where I think this really has a place is we quite often talk about, you know, with flavoured gins and, you know, gin liqueurs, bringing people into the gin category. This I feel like is a really interesting gateway product between people who maybe have come into gin from these more like sweetened flavoured stuff. And it's like, right, we want to get people into gin for the long term, not just for these like, you know, maybe flavoured trend-led things. And I think if you give this to somebody, it's like, right, there are other botanicals here, get used to juniper, get used to this other stuff. And yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I want to see more products like this kind of for that reason.
Yeah, it's doing what I'm excited by is there are, as Anne was saying, there's flavors that are in this that are very difficult to get through distillation, but there's still a way of doing it well, and I think that's exactly what they've done. Just finally, in terms of drinks, I think in the winter some sort of hot thing with it I think would be lovely, but I'd also be intrigued as if you put some sort of red vermouth, maybe a little bit of ginger wine, some lemonade, kind of Pimsy fruit cup kind of style thing. I think that would work really well as well. Right, great. And now we'll move finally onto our last one, and this is from Peru. This is London to Lima. This is their mulberry and cocoa leaf gin. Now, bearing in mind they are in Peru, so so it's 36.8% ABV. So this is kind of, I mean, mulberry gin has had a lot of, it's quite historical in the UK, along with sloe gin, of course, and damson as well. And so this is kind of a Peruvian twist on that. So some of the local botanicals include things like pink peppercorn, local citrus, and some local fruits. It's their standard gin, or their original gin, has a grape base, and the grape is usually used to make pisco. And then in addition, you've got the local mulberry. So the mulberries are coming from Peru, cocoa leaf, and also some wild honey to add some sweetness. And as you can see, it is it's almost like a Pedro Jimenez sherry kind of color to it. So this is going to be sweet. So any initial thoughts on this? Joanne, do you want to kick us off?
So I really like the idea of this one because I really like the use of cocoa. I'm struggling with it. I like the idea of it, but I'm struggling with it is for a gin, because there's lots of very unusual flavours in there that are not recognisable with gin. It's pleasant. I'm struggling I don't get a lot of juniper at all. So I'm not getting the traditional classical backbone there, that even what we've said, if it's not up front with other gins, you still get it on dilution in the background. I'm struggling to get it even in the background. But it's a pleasant drink, and I quite like the lots of the cocoa in there.
Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Joanne in terms of not really getting the juniper or identifying those key botanicals that you would recognise as gin, but also it's very enjoyable as a drink. So it's sweet, but then I think it must be the cocoa makes it almost have a dry finish slightly. It doesn't become too cloying in the mouth. I can imagine having this actually in my opinion in preference to sloe gin after dinner, because I'm not a huge sloe gin fan. So yeah.
Any thoughts on how you would drink it? Alice, any thoughts on how you drink it?
For me, it's I'm not sure how I drink it, but because of the sweetness, for me, I want a little bit more alcohol in there. It's kind of asking for a bit more spirit, but I'm not sure exactly how I do that. I'm not a big cocktail person, so I'm kind of not sure.
Fair enough. Christy?
Yeah, this one's super interesting. I haven't tried it like this, but I would be interested in giving it a go in a fizz, just to see like that slight lengthening of it, see how that would work. But it's giving me all these Christmassy vibes. I'd almost want to try cooking with it as well. Put it over some ice cream, like see how that plays out, because the flavors are gorgeous. But like everyone else has said, like I struggle with it as a gin, but I really enjoy tasting it. I love the flavors. I love what's going on with it. But yeah, I'm kind of, my head's a bit like, what would I do with it? I'm not sure, but yeah, it's delicious.
I think that in addition to somewhat looking like PX, it's got some of the flavour characteristics as well with the sweetness. So having played around with it a little bit, it's quite nice, maybe with a 50-50 mix of this and the original London dry gin in a Negroni. I think that works really nicely. There's a sweetness, there's complexity. does work very well in a fizz, just with like soda water, maybe a little bit of lemon, lots of ice, just nice and easy and very refreshing. But also works quite well, you know, just a little splash and then some sparkling wine, like dead easy. I think simplicity is key for the mixing with something like this. Bernie, final thoughts to you.
So I have to say something about this one. That is, I'm not partial to grape bases, and I never have been. And it's something as a judge, I really have to focus to get my head around, to step aside that preference and look at the drink as it is to judge it. But this I really love. I love it. It works as a grape base. I totally agree with everybody's sentiments about the gin status of it. But I love it, and I think it would be a great after dinner drink. Yeah.
Right, well, so that was the last product. I think a great selection of lots of different things. Once again, very exciting 12 months and lots of different products going on in gin. I think I'll go around quickly and ask people what their favourites were, and then if there was any particular insight that this tasting provided them with. Christy, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I can't really pick up one particular favourite, but what I'm particularly excited to see over the last few months is kind of almost a return to the purity of gin and what makes gin amazing, and almost like a shutting out of the noise from the distractions of gin that we've maybe had in the last few years, like something juniper forward, something delicious, something fresh, something revitalising. And yeah, I'm excited for where gin's going to go. I think there's a lot of growth still to come from gin.
Yep. Alice?
To me, the first one we tried, it was a real standout for me, and a cool concept. I really like the idea of reining in all of the complexity that's kind of come about in the last year or so, and bringing it back to the kind of the roots of gin, and going down that classical route again.
Joanne?
There's three kind of things for me. So again, like Alice said, I do like the first one. I like the simplicity of it, and I like the fact that there's a trend towards just concentrating on simplicity. I've always advocated don't throw the kitchen sink at a gin, let the botanicals talk for themselves. But I also like classical gins, so I do like the Hayman's one. I like a classical example of which it is very delightful. And I'll also just wave the flag for some flavoured gins. If you're going to do a flavoured gin, it is out there, consumers are drinking it, they do like it, but let's try and do some well classically made ones as well, which I think that was one is a good example of.
That's good. And Bernie?
What I found really interesting about this selection is you kind of had this juxtaposition of some people going back to the juniper and back to this tradition, and then you still had these other gins that were very explorative, like you know, the nadir gin, the apple and pear, like different techniques in making. And I found that really interesting that you kind of got this branching out of two different ways, and it's the creativity in the industry that I really love. But I totally agree, you shouldn't take your eye off what gin is. If I had to give a favourite, I'd probably say it was the Hayman's, actually. I thought for the ABV and the complexity and the softness, I think it was an incredibly well-made drink, so that's my favourite.
And the final word to the Grand Rectifier, Dr. Anne Brock.
Thank you, David. No, I mean, this has been really interesting in terms of the selection of 8 gins to try. I'm really pleased to see that there were some strong gins that were putting juniper first, because that's very important for me. And easily for me, I agree with Bernie, my favourite was Hayman's. I thought it was an outstanding gin. Having said that, the gin that I'm going to walk away from this tasting with in a glass to sip tonight is going to be the Warner Edwards Apple and Pear. You know, David, you know that I can sometimes be quite scathing about flavoured gins, but the two we tried tonight have been great. You know, they're great examples of what is a burgeoning and blossoming sector in our industry. And then finally, it would have to be nadir gin. I think there's so much more that can be done around exploring base spirits. I thought that was challenging as a spirit, but I'd like to see more investigation and exploration of that space.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody, because I couldn't have done it without you. Literally, I couldn't have done it without you. So, and it's been great. It's been great to have such discussion, different viewpoints and everything. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this maybe again, but a little bit closer. But thank you very much, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome.